So the way that I like to get the pins up here out of their place, I'm sure you already have a way. I just tend to take a long flathead screwdriver, and if you go look into the head tube, you take your flathead screwdriver, you can go into the socket and then behind the pin, and if you just give it a turn, it completely dislodges it. Hell yeah. Okay. All the cables are coming out of the head tube too. Nice. Okay. Then I'm sure you're already aware of this. You can pull it forward and then towards the head tube to get the socket over the last alignment pin or the last alignment bolt that keeps it in place. And we're basically, you can already see here what's happening. Basically pulling it forward. Yeah, we're basically bringing it forward just so it gets out. It gives us enough leverage to make that turn. I'm going to take the battery plug connector, because I'm going to use one of these flat edges to press it against the cartridge plate, the cartridge connector plate, and then try to press it forward and bring it down, right? So, one right there. Let's see. Yeah, maybe need some more slack. And bring that press it in. And then it's loosened from here, and if you dislocate the top now, the whole socket should just slide out. All right, so the last bit of prepping before I put the socket in. I'm sure you've also done this already. I just like to put 2 strips of tape. I mean, first of all, of course, like straighten the motor cable so that when we do get it into position, we don't, or when we're bringing it up, we're not bothered by it going down the top tube or where it shouldn't be. But then I put 2 strips of tape, one to hold the buttons against the motor cable, and the other one to hold the speaker and light cable to the motor cable. There you have it. No loose cables you're not gonna interfere or anything. I mean, obviously be careful and use your feelings and whatnot, but you do want to get them relatively straight in line. But now we're at a point where we can put this in. So what I like to do is I like to use gravity to my advantage, and use gravity to basically hold the motor cable, and it's going to pull its way. It's going to basically like just drop into place, if you understand what I mean. And it'll slowly guide it through. And when it comes down here, it's going to enter the battery connector. And then from here, you can still adjust the way that the socket is sitting. But once you're over here, your motor cable should be coming out of the headset, out of the head tube. And then you're going to start pulling it. And as you're pulling it out of the head tube, you're just basically with these cables and with the motor cable, with the rotation that you can use from motor cable, you're going to make sure that that socket is the way that you want to have it. I like to have the back piece the whole time sliding along where at the end the cable sleeve covers all the cables. So maybe you've already experienced this, but from this side, oh shit, let's see if you can see on the camera. You see the edge of the battery connector socket piece. These pins, they like to get stuck right there, and that's fine, because that's going to still give us enough, they're going to have enough tension where they're going to pop right into where they need to go in the alignment pins. So when they do catch there, you just take a flathead, or you take a round number 5, whatever you have lying around, to just ever so slightly, sorry I'm going to get in the way, press it down so it makes that curve, or it makes that, it passes the top tube, and then they're ready to go. If it's crooked, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get the socket to make that bend, you know? So if it's straight, then when it starts to bend, it's going to bend this way, and then it's going to sling into its slot, right? As you can see here. But if it's crooked, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get the cartridge piece in, and then also have the battery side aligned as well. So then we're at the point where we can do the same thing when we pull it forward and lift it over, like we did when we removed it, to make some extra room. So here you can actually perfectly see what's going on. So I'm pulling this forward, but the cartridge plug itself is catching on the top tube, right? And so it doesn't want to make that turn. So if I now took the socket tool and then tried to slide it up to hit the cartridge connector back plate to make that turn, all I'll be doing is I'll be pressing this cartridge connector into the edge of the top tube right here. So that's, I overheard that you said, where's that wooden stick, or where's my wooden stick? This is the perfect time to use that wooden stick to basically just go through the top tube, the rear of the top tube, where the cartridges go up, and just make sure that you slightly press this cartridge connector forward and out before we hit it on the back plate to make that turn. There we go. And now it's at a point where if we just release it from the top connector here, it should just slip right into position. Yeah. From here, yeah, I tend to just push this forward, and then you can use your forefinger through the cartridge connector. Yeah, the battery one can be frustrating for sure. So the tool that we do have, right, and I hope you guys do order it if you get the chance, it has the perfect cutout for the battery insert. Hypothetically, this insert is supposed to be used by plugging it into the battery connector directly, and then just using it from there to adjust where the socket sits. I have found from my own experience that that's not always the most effective way of doing it, because my thinking is, if this is where all the pressure is on the connector, it's not the connector that we're trying to move, it's the tiny pins that sit about this far back from the connector. And if you're adjusting the pressure down here, you're going to have less success adjusting where those pins are when you're trying to adjust it from back here, you know? Exactly. So, we can try that. We can see, because if the socket is perfectly aligned, if it's the perfect length of when we had prepared it before, you can have success with this. Otherwise, there is the back plate on which the battery connector sits. I found if you have a flat piece of wood or something, to hold it in place and then press it, have the pins lined up with the holes, and then just press it, you have a better chance of having it just kind of slide into position than you do trying to adjust it from the side of the connector. Yeah, no, I wouldn't forgive it. Really too rigid. It's twisted. What I've noticed is I'm lucky because I have long fingers, but I go to the headset connector, and then you can see my finger here. I move the connector left and right while keeping my eye in the holes here. Sorry. You can adjust it, and you can see in the hole itself that there's movement. So as long as you see one of the pins at this hole, it's either going to be the front or the rear pin. But once it's in position, it's relatively centered with that hole. If you've got a flat piece of wood or something on that battery connector, you can just add a little bit of pressure until those pins find their place. We got this all mixed up. Okay, so just now it worked out for me. For the last bit, there's just a little shock of pressure that you press down, and then it found the pins. in the right position. So if you go to round Allen 5 and you place it within where the brake hole is, and you place it on the back there, you can use that as a piece of leverage, and you don't risk breaking any of the cables, to then adjust it to make sure that the hole on the top tube side here, that you will line it up. And the reason we decided to take the screw, I'm gonna lift this a bit. The reason we decided to take the screw is because it gets old. The screw falls down all the time. I've just moved it enough for where it's perfectly aligned. And I'm just using that leverage from the round Allen 5. And with this end, I've got the screw on the end so I don't have to worry about it falling off. Or you can just thread it right into place. And it's caught nicely, out to place. I can turn it off and then the tape comes off and the screw is in place. Alright, so now the socket is in place, and last but not least, of course, is getting the brake cable in. Through the frame, you should be able to see the backing plate, the one where all the wires are stuffed behind. The backing plate, it widens out towards the end of the socket. And it widens out to the exact diameter of where all the cables and the sleeve go, right? So, because of that, when you feed in the new brake line, or the old brake line, if you didn't cut too much off, you basically have to aim it behind the plate and behind the frame on the back, so that you can feed it down. Because if you feed it like just straight in and then try to fix it back there, it's not gonna actually be behind, and then you risk again with the battery, or when you put in a new battery, that the brake line is in. So you see, here already the brake line is already present. And the reason it's already so high, and it's not just going right into the battery tube. So I've threaded it underneath the metal plate here. It's right underneath there, so then when you're threading this cable down, it stays behind the backing plate. And then it's just about making sure that it comes out of the battery tube on the other side. There it is already. Yeah. So it's just important to, when you do thread the brake cable, that you do pay attention to where it's going in. It doesn't just need to go into the battery tube, it needs to be behind the backing plate. There you go. So that's what it's going to look like when it's done. So there's no overlap and there's no worry for. But yeah, my recommendation is basically just putting the kick block cable in first. With this, obviously, like tomato, just because it can get annoying if routing the kick block cable. But yeah, then from there it's connecting the hydraulic brakes again. Obviously bleeding the whole system again, from the bottom to the top, to make sure it's got enough oil.